Welcome, everyone. I'm Diana Wu. I'm the Dean of UC Berkeley Extension, UC Berkeley Global, and the New Academic Ventures Unit at Berkeley. And I'm so delighted that you're joining me this morning. UC Berkeley Global and the Women in Technology Initiative at UC is launching our speaker series this morning, featuring corporate leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion who will share their journeys and insights with us. So corporate leaders today are dealing with at least 3 crises at the moment. So leaving the political crisis aside just for the moment, there's the health crisis, the economic crisis caused by the health crisis, which is completely changing businesses and business models and education. And then there is the racial injustice crisis. Many of these injustices are not new. They have been there all along. So unlike the other 2 crises, racial injustice has been here. And along the way, there has been some reflection and some significant and insignificant actions and progress. But this year, 2020, crisis has presented us a real opportunity for change. And as our staff engage in discussions of racial justice, leaders are seizing this moment to consider our roles and opportunities to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within our organizations. So in my role, for example, I may ask myself, what is UC Berkeley Global here for? And what are we responsible for? Ultimately, we are here to help create access and opportunity. Access and opportunity to education, to jobs, to bettering our lives. But we can be truly successful and truly effective only if we can achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. So here we are, we're a top research university in the world, and we have faculty who teach and consult in the very areas of diversity and inclusion. And we have a serious responsibility to our students, to our corporate partners, to our regional and global community to teach about this and to emphasize its importance. But is our own workplace diverse and equitable and inclusive? In short, we are seizing the opportunity, but we have a very long way to go and much to learn from experts in this speaker series that we are launching today, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited about it. So I am delighted to introduce 2 of my favorite partners in crime who are going to moderate this series. And they are Dr. Ramu Nagapan, my assistant dean for Berkeley Global, and Jen Finlayson, director of the Women in Technology Initiative at UC. They will explore with today's very special guest speaker, so I won't steal their thunder, her career in advancing diversity and inclusion initiatives. So Ramu and Jill, take it away.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you to everyone who's attending today. It was a great way to set the stage for this series that we're embarking on. And as our dean mentioned, we are really excited to support this effort and really engage in this very important conversation. So it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our featured speaker. Anika Balkan leads diversity and inclusion for OpenTable and KAYAK, which is part of Booking Holdings brand. Prior to her work at OK, she led external and C-suite equality engagements for Salesforce and held numerous roles within the diversity, inclusion, and culture development space at Walmart and the Department of Defense. Anika graduated with a BA in political science from Sonoma State University, and in 2018 was awarded the Advocate of the Year Award by Information Age and Women in IT. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jill to kick off the conversation.
Thank you. So I'm Jill Finlayson, and I'm the director of the Women in Tech Initiative. So of course, I'm always excited to see women leaders leading the way and, really being experts in their field. So thank you for joining us today. And our first question is really about you. And, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about your role, how you came into leading diversity and inclusion at OpenTable and KAYAK, and what have you been charged with doing?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jill, for having me. Thanks to everybody for putting this together. I think it's awesome when we can use our platforms to have, conversations around diversity and inclusion. And my mom will be so excited. She's a Berkeley alum, so I'll make sure she tunes in afterwards. But, I think my journey has really started with a love of people, the issues that bring us together, the conflicts that keep us apart, right? I've always been really, really fascinated by that. And so in school, it took me 3 different majors to figure out sort of how I wanted to connect with people in the work that I would lead in my professional career. I started focusing on psychology, then I looked at business, and ultimately I graduated with a degree in political science. And I actually thought I was going to go down the path of intelligence work. So right after school, I went to go work for the Department of Defense in a public affairs role, which was fascinating. And after that, I had a great opportunity to join the PR team at Walmart. So really, for me, when I think about Walmart, that was an opportunity to really cut my teeth in the space at scale. They are the largest company in the world with 2.2 million employees, so much complexity in the space. And how I got into the space was really, starting as a PR leader and really thinking about, what are the stories that we want to be telling. We were really focused on how to tell a technology story, an innovation story, how e-commerce was going to sort of change the landscape for what was traditionally a sort of a box store footprint. And for me, I was really more interested again in the people issues and seeing, the humans that were making decisions at scale to drive change. And so I left PR and I went into the business to actually start a new function focused on culture, diversity, employee engagement, and belonging. And so that was just, such an amazing time to build something from scratch and have to deal with, so much enterprise complexity. It was also a time when the LGBTQ rights movement was really happening in the United States, and just really seeing the impact on how our LGBTQ employees were coming into work and they couldn't present as their authentic selves and they didn't feel comfortable, and seeing the transformation that we went on within the company and outside the company was just so profound for me and my career that it sort of anchored me to this D&I work, I think, forever. From there, I had an incredible opportunity to join the equality team at Salesforce. When I think about my experience, I always think about, Walmart representing scale. When I think about Salesforce, I really think about speed and agility. And what a cool experience to work at a company where the CEO is an activist in his own right, where the leadership team is fully supportive, where they've resourced this work really appropriately. And so for me, it was really, how do I take my skills and work in the context of, unlimited potential? And so now I lead diversity and inclusion for KAYAK and OpenTable. For me, travel and dining is such a magical space because it is about truly connecting people through, exposure to the world and new ideas, about connecting them through shared meals and conversation. And so that just felt like such a sweet spot to be working in D&I in these areas. It's also a smaller company. So for me, it's really about creating impact and going deep, right? There are lessons that I learned working at large corporations where I thought, many times, what would this look like if we got this right at a smaller scale? What if we started earlier? What would that look like? And I think that's so magical because we get to go really, really deep and create that impact. So, yeah. Oh, and in terms of my charter, DNI is a really special body of work because it touches absolutely every component of any business, right? If you think about sort of the traditional model, people very much think about sort of the impact that you can have on employees within the company, but it's so much bigger than that, right? It's everything from how do you make strategic and long tail decisions for the company, working with the C-suite and the CEO. It's about layering equality into your core products, into your design processes, into your marketing strategies, into your recruiting, right? So you really have successful D&I work when you have a connection point to every component of your business. And so that's how I really think about leading D&I at KAYAK and OpenTable.
I like your journey, and I like the fact that you included the size issue. And one of the things we always talk to startups about is how important it is to be intentional about inclusive hiring from the early start of the company. And so to see it integrated across the functions is really exciting to hear. And I can see why your journey took you there. Let me turn it over to Ramu.
Sure, yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I think it's really helpful to know sort of how you grew into this role. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more specifically about OpenTable and KAYAK, and so how does the company define diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, we think about diversity and inclusion really as, you know, diversity is about representation. It's about diverse ideas, perspectives. It's about bringing people into the organization that have unique lived experiences that are going to be able to know and authentically understand, you know, how our products or our services might impact a various range of communities. I think inclusion, you know, and how we think about it is really, you know, how do people feel part of the team? How do people feel connected to our products, right? Are there equal opportunities? Is there access to use our products or our services, right? So I think we just really want to make philosophically a business that appeals to everybody, right? We serve a very diverse consumer base, and we are striving to have an employee population that really reflects the communities where we live and work.
You know, Diana kicked us off talking about the COVID, right? And the different crises that we're facing. And I was just wondering, you know, the media is even calling this a she session. How has COVID-19 made this a challenging time for you? And how has OpenTable and KAYAK dealt with this crisis and supported employees?
Yeah, COVID has been an incredible crisis. We've seen crises in our history, but this one has really come on three fronts, right? We talked about this earlier in the economic crisis. We talked about the health crisis and the racial equality crisis. And I think the way that, you know, I think about this is everybody is sort of dealing with hardship in their own unique ways. I talk to people who are isolating alone and they're dealing with, you know, mental health and isolation issues. I talk to people who are trying to parent and maybe they're a single parent with 3 or 4 kids in an apartment. Right? We can only imagine, right? Everybody's struggle is really different. We also have a lot of conversations right now with our Black employees and our employees of color who are really concerned, right? We've seen increased violence towards the Black community. We are, you know, having these experiences where, you know, somebody would say, "How was your weekend? I hope it was great," right? And that's really not the experience that someone is living, right? And so it's really hard to come into work and see all of this play out on television or on social media and really feel comfortable and really feel that you can just bring your authentic self to work. And so, you know, first and foremost, I think at KAYAK and OpenTable, our strategy has been really taking care of our employees during this time. You know, for us, that's really meant really beefing up support around mental health resources. We've reduced hours for folks if they needed some time to take off. In summer, we created summer hours in the business so people could really sort of have a little bit more balance, right? I think we recognize that everybody is taking on more than what they're accustomed to, right? You might be parenting and cooking and doing laundry and trying to take the dogs for a walk and working, and just the list goes on and on and on. And you might be caring for someone with COVID, or you might have it yourself, right? And so for us, it's really about how do we create that circle of support for our employees, really enhancing our resources, really doing deep listening, being extra intentional about circling our employee resource groups for our most underrepresented communities, because we know that there is a disproportionate impact on communities of color and underrepresented groups. And I think the one thing that I feel really proud about is our leadership team has done a really good job being vulnerable themselves. I think, we sort of have it in our heads that good leaders posture and put on a brave face when things are really hard. And I actually think in this circumstance, vulnerability is so welcome and warranted. And it really goes a long way in making sure people feel that they're not alone, and that people are sort of sharing in their struggle or their challenge. It might not be the same, they might not fully understand it, but we have that sort of shared struggle and that shared empathy.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a challenge right now when we look at other companies. Like, any tips or advice? People are burning out. People are not taking vacation because there's no place to go. So would you say there's one thing that really stands out that you would advise other companies to be sure to do? And maybe it is the vulnerability.
Yeah, I would say be vulnerable as a leadership team. I would also say remind people over and over and over again that they should take their PTO, and that they should be intentional about carving out some haven for themselves, even if they can't go on a big trip, even, whatever. Everybody's got their different version of quarantine math, right? And what feels comfortable. And I think, it really is incumbent on the leadership team of any organization to set the tone and to remind people that when they come to work, they should feel good, right? It doesn't serve anybody anything if people are coming to work and they're so anxious or they're so stressed about something that's happening in their life, right? You just think about the productivity that can happen when you're not taking care of our human needs first, and it's not much. So I think it's better to just, give that permission right from the top.
So wanted to switch a little bit and shift to talking about another facet of culture and people, and ask you a little bit about recruitment. It's something we think about a lot, even here at UC Berkeley, when we think about staff and faculty. So how do you handle inclusive recruitment at your company? What do you do? What steps are you taking to ensure a fair and inclusive process?
Yeah, well, I think, for me, there's been a lot of conversation around systematic injustice, right? And the understanding of, how do our systems create inequalities for various communities? And so we've gone really, really deep on inclusive recruiting because it is a very complex system, and we have redeployed all of our recruiters to basically do an inclusive recruiting audit, which I think is something that every company has the capability to do and really should do. I think you learn a lot for D&I benefits, but also just you learn so much about, where your business is when you do this work. And what that means is really, we've mapped every single role profile in the company, and we've looked at every single step of our hiring process. So how do we, get permission? How do we post jobs? What is the language that we use in our job postings? Do we have a diverse set of panelists interviewing candidates? Do candidates go through an equitable sort of process in terms of how many interviews they have? Do we give them the same types of coding tests, whiteboarding tests, right, across the brands, across teams? And I think when you actually look at that, we found that, there are points in the process, as in any process, where bias can start creeping into the system. And so once we sort of mapped the process for what it was as it stood today, we went through and identified, how could bias be creeping into this process? And, the other piece is sometimes when we talk about process, everybody thinks they know the process. When you actually ask people to articulate what is the process, and let's actually write it down, somebody's process might be very different than someone else's process. And so when you have that, or when you have a lack of process by definition, it really can mean writing a new process where everybody can speak about what it is. It's clearly defined. Everybody can articulate it in the same way. Because when you don't have that, there can be equity issues, right? People living two different experiences and what we think is sort of a company standard. And so that was a really healthy exercise for us to go through. We are looking at, everything now from diversifying our hiring panels to using more inclusive language in our job postings, and really overhauling our entire recruiting system, so that every candidate can have that, really inclusive and equal hiring experience.
Yeah, that sounds like a very comprehensive review of hiring practices. And I mean, have you encountered any resistance to taking on this kind of change? And if so, how have you handled that?
I mean, I'll say there's been no resistance. I think it's really about knowing how to shuttle work, right? Recruiters have a job to do, and it's a full-time job, and they're actually working within the process. I think it can be challenging to sort of pause the daily grind, right? And pivot into proactive sort of process mapping work. That's a challenge for anybody. And I think, it's really about sort of bandwidth and managing time well. We had to make it a priority. And I think that's really about saying, we're going to put a stake in the ground, and we're going to invest in this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to take the time. I think the benefit to doing that is you're going to broaden your talent pool. You're going to get better candidates. You're going to open that access, which ultimately drives business results. So is it an investment? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Absolutely. And I think that's just how we have to move forward.
Speaking of being proactive, maybe you can give us some examples of ways you're tangibly expanding the talent pipeline. How are you intentionally reaching out to diverse talent? What have you changed in your processes to bring in talent wherever it is?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm a firm believer personally that talent really can come from anywhere. That being said, there has to be the right supports and the right opportunities. And I think, one of the biggest actions that people can take, especially with hiring managers, is to challenge the behavior of asking for the unicorn candidate. And what I mean by that is hiring managers oftentimes will say, I want the sun, the moon, and the stars in this candidate. I want just the best person for the job. They probably are just like me, right? And I think we have to challenge that. And I think we have to say, what skills are on the team, right? And get a holistic team lens on what do we have today, and what are we missing, and hire for that. So it's a fundamental sort of shift. And then I also would say, we need to start asking in our job recs and in our postings for the minimum requirements for the job that you actually need. And the reason that we would say, hire for the minimum in terms of the job posting is there's good data out there that tells us that women won't even apply for a job or consider a job unless they have 100% of the qualifications listed in that posting. So if you're asking for the unicorn candidate, all the nice to haves, all the bells and whistles that you particularly think you need, then automatically you might be losing women. Men, on the other hand, will apply for a job if they only have 10% of the requirements on the job posting, and they'll take that risk and they'll go for it anyway. And so you can see just by sort of presenting those facts up front in the job posting, you might be creating inequalities and not even getting a chance to meet a candidate that might actually be sort of that magical candidate that has all the nice to haves plus. The other thing I would say is, we really need to think through, getting people in the pipeline and allowing them to tell us what we don't know, right? So if we sort of have a prescription of everything that we need and they come in and they provide something, special that we hadn't considered, that's the value of having diverse teams, right? Is like there are going to be perspectives and insights about your business that are things that you didn't even know you needed. And so I think we just need to really support that natural process.
What I really like about that is it's putting the responsibility on the hiring manager. People often think this is the job of HR, this is the job of recruiting, but in fact, it really comes down to the hiring manager. So giving them the opportunity to reflect and to really think about what is the criteria that is actually needed. You talked about early in your career, cybersecurity was an area that you were sort of exploring. And I sort of laughed because last year we did a symposium on cybersecurity, and people would have, 10 years of experience required. And it's like the field is changing too quickly. Do you really need 10 years? Or do you, if you found the perfect candidate and they had 3 years of experience, would you really turn them down? So I really appreciate that thinking about, what is the criteria? And then what are we missing on the other side? What is our team not having? Great tips. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So you've touched on the issue of belonging a couple times, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about things your company is doing to make, to help employees feel like they do belong and that they can be their authentic selves.
Sure. I mean, for me, in my mind, belonging is really about how you feel about a culture that you're either a part of or not a part of, right? Do you feel that sense of belonging? And I think for us, one way to really feel that you belong is to have your ideas heard and your ideas actioned on. And so I think a great example for us at KAYAK and OpenTable is following the tragic death of George Floyd. We held several listening sessions with our people of color employee research group to really understand, how the community is doing as sort of a first step. And then we had a brainstorming session with that same group to think about sort of what are those key actions that would really move the needle? What are you really needing? What can the business really do to support this community at this time? And we got together a spreadsheet. We had hundreds of people on the call, everybody contributing. And one of the big themes that kind of kept coming up was this idea of representation mattering so much and really wanting to have a connection point to our marketing work and the external voice of the company, right? Really giving people of color in our underrepresented groups a role and help contributing to what we're putting out there as a brand and in the public sphere. And so we took that and we really thought about it. And we thought about sort of what is the best way to do this, knowing everybody already has, day jobs across multiple departments in the company. And the marketers really wanting to also create that really authentic content that would resonate with all the diverse customers that we serve. And so we've pulled together an inclusive marketing summit where we talked about really strong principles of inclusive marketing, looking at things like tone, language, representation, hierarchy, context. Our marketers went through a special training. Our employee resource groups also went through the same training. We've created a new process for content review that we're piloting right now on the OpenTable side of the house. And we are pulling together diverse review panels so that the ERGs and their members really give input and guidance, right? That's not the right word. That means something different to this community than it might mean to that community, right? So really, I think that is going to be such a powerhouse for inclusive marketing for the company, is really making it more authentic. I think also, when we think about authenticity, another point was, how do we make sure that content is being generated from the communities that we're talking about, and it's authentic, and it pays tribute to the historical context of the community. It's honoring the community, it's celebrating the community. And so we've contracted freelancers now that are experts from the Native and Indigenous community, from the Latinx community. So we're really getting into that rhythm of making sure that we have folks represented behind sort of the screen, in the writing room, leading our photography or design, and really making sure that that's authentic. And that's a direct result of just really listening to our employees and making sure that we are taking action on the things that are really important to them.
It's interesting, you know, in the past, companies have very much tried to stay away from talking about social issues. But now, you know, what is the role of leaders in companies in taking a stance on issues like Black Lives Matter? Because now companies that don't say anything are in almost deeper hot water than those that say something.
Sure. I mean, I'm a believer that, you know, these things, and especially when we look at how, you know, millennials and younger generations are thinking about these issues, and how they correlate with business, they're really one and the same, right? They no longer think about sort of companies as serving only shareholders, right? We have an obligation to all of our stakeholders, our partners, our customers, our employees, shareholders, still society. And I think, you know, the way that we translate that at KAYAK and OpenTable is to really think about, you know, what are our values? We have a value that's really about winning as one. And I think when one community is suffering, or we're not taking care of that community in how we talk to the community and how we represent the community, right, that doesn't align with the value. And so I think it's just a really good reminder for us that, you know, values drive everything that we do. And so to stay true to the values of winning as one, and equality and diversity and inclusion, you know, I think it's really important. I'm very proud we took a stance publicly on Black Lives Matter. I think, you know, for me, that was a moment. Moments are really important, but it's really about creating a movement within the company, a movement in society. It's about taking tangible steps. It's about taking sort of words to support a community and putting them into action. It means, you know, really looking at ourselves through the magnifying glass, looking at our processes, doing lots of listening, and then taking, you know, the listening and turning it into action. And like I said, I think we're in an age where, you know, brands and companies really do have a new set of standards for how we articulate these issues, how we take care of our employees, how we take a position. And I think we just have to let our values sort of drive decision making. It's uncharted waters in a lot of ways for companies, but I think we're on the path, and I feel very proud about sort of where we're going as a company.
So as you look internally, what are some of the quantitative or qualitative ways you gauge the state of your corporate health?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple ways that I think about this, certainly in terms of quantitative data, right? We do an employee engagement survey every year. And within that, we ask several diversity and inclusion questions. I think what's really important, though, as you think about sort of maybe conducting your own employee engagement survey or participating in one, if you're another company, is that you really are pulling majority opinion, right? And so I think it's also important to have focus groups and to really pull minority opinion, right? And making sure that voices that might be fewer are still represented and brought into the equation of how you think about your corporate culture. I think there's been a long trend of companies that only look at employee engagement survey scores as sort of the health metric, and forget that some underrepresented voices might be lost in the numbers. I think there's also, you know, this area is so important to use data to drive decision making. I think, when I think about the landscape and the way we write systems and just how we do work, everything needs to be done, right? Diversity and inclusion is a body of work that never ends, and there's always more to learn and always more to do. And so using data really helps us prioritize, what do we really need to focus on first? So I'm really excited. Actually, earlier this week and last week, we started rolling out our executive Dni Dashboards, which is data and analytics that tells us the representation within our organization. It gives our senior executives visibility into who's leaving the organization, who's moving through the different levels of the organization, what their total representation stands. And I think that's so important because you think about each of those issues, there's really different solutioning that has to happen to address each one of those things, right? One might be focused on hiring and recruiting strategies. One might be focused on development, mentorship, performance management, engagement, right? So we really need to know our data so that we can take this from sort of a macro, big picture sort of problem statement into something that is digestible and hackable, so we can really start solving problems within the business. And I think the first step is really understanding the landscape and where you are before you can take action.
I think a lot of companies are becoming more aware that they have to kind of survey and listen to their folks, but where some fall down is they don't do anything after the survey. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about kind of best practices. If you're going to do a survey, what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I get all of the data for the diversity and inclusion content, and we focus group a lot. I am constantly on a listening tour with employees in the business to figure out sort of, more context on, what does this feedback mean? What are things that we could be doing better? Where do we need to pivot? Is this a priority to you? Is this a priority to the community? And I think just really doing that deep listening is so important. Then it's really about putting it into action and prioritizing it. So we've internally published D&I commitments based on the priorities of our groups, and really doing that deep listening so that we make sure we're focused on the things that are most important to the communities that we're trying to be in service of. I think lots of businesses think very critically about how do we serve the customer. And for us, our employees really are our customer on this front.
And you've been in the DEI space for a period of time now. I'm sure other companies and other people in this role have come to you. What questions are you being asked the most often right now?
I get asked all kinds of questions. I would say, the question I absolutely hear the most of, which gives me so much hope, is how do I get into the space? And I think, I've talked to a few friends that have told me it's now D&I practitioners are the hottest job, even above engineers at this moment, which really signals, where people are, right? How are people thinking about these issues and the importance of getting this stuff right. And so that always delights me. I definitely had an unconventional path into the space. But I think, if you're passionate and you love people, this is incredibly challenging work. It is not for the faint of heart, but it is so rewarding. It's when you get things right, you really are working in service of your colleagues and of society. The other types of questions that I get really, I'd say most oftenly revolve around language. So am I using the right term for a topic? People tend to get very nervous about, what is the right word? And I don't want to make a mistake. And there's so much fear about this. And I think, the advice that I always give is we must break through and get into a culture and a habit of asking and, humbly saying, like, here's the context, here's why I would like to know, I would like to do this in the right way, I'd like to be thoughtful, and really asking. It is okay to ask. On the flip side, I'd say contrarians would say to me, well, aren't these just words? It's just semantics. You know what I mean when I say this, and that wasn't my intention. And I think, language is so critical. It is the thing that sort of underpins empathy, and it really connects us as a society. And so I'd say, words and language matter, and words and language evolve, right? And so if we want to come from a place where we're building trust and mutual understanding, it behooves everybody to keep learning what is the most appropriate term, what are the issues that pertain to a particular community, or really just take more effort to understand our history, right? Like, so much of the conflict that we see in the workplace or in broader society comes from a lack of shared understanding of our history. And so I think it's so important just to invest in learning.
So kind of continuing on the theme of advice you would give, there are certainly some companies, especially when it comes to technology or engineering teams, some companies who recognize they are not where they need to be in terms of the diversity of their workforce. What advice would you give them as far as, how they should start and what they should do now?
Yeah, I would say, if you can afford to, hiring a dedicated resource is essential. This is complex work. It is complicated, and it is a big body of work, an endless body of work. And you really do need a dedicated resource, or more than one dedicated resource, ideally, to start building sort of the foundational framework for how your company will think about these issues, not just in the present, but for the next 5 or 10 years. That being said, diversity and inclusion is absolutely nobody's individual job, right? This work doesn't work unless you have the buy-in from leadership, from individual contributors, from hiring managers, really everybody within the organization, to think about, in the context of their sphere of influence, adding sort of D&I as a lens through which you look through. That is really how you power this work, and it really is everyone's job.
What would you say to companies that are perhaps afraid of what they might find, feel like there might be a legal liability if they know they have a problem? What is your advice to them?
I would say the future of talent management is diversity and inclusion. I think we have to walk boldly towards our problems. We need to just look at our hotspots and look in the mirror and say, hey, like, if this is a problem, like, what would it take to solve it? You can't get anywhere if you sort of hide from any kind of problem, right? And this is no different. The thing I will say is, by 2050, the United States will have no racial majority in the United States. Women represent 70 to 80% of all purchasing decisions around the world, and 1.3 billion people are persons with disabilities. So when we think about talent management, talent performance, focusing on these issues, we need to see that the populations that we serve, and our customers, in our employees, in our communities, they are diverse. And I think the brands that get to customized, personalized, relevant experiences across the board that really serve the communities that they're working for, they will succeed from a human capital perspective and a financial capital perspective.
Great. Jill, any other questions, or should we open it up to our participants?
Let's ask one more question. Sort of, let's look to the big future here, and let's ask the question, how is the future of talent management going to look different from today?
I mean, I would say it's similar to what I just said. It's really about how do we design experiences that sort of customize to our employees' needs, How do we serve them in the way that they want to be served? Same applies for our customers. It's really, supporting people and meeting them where they are is how I think about that. And I think, frankly, in 2020 during COVID, there's never been a more important time to really meet people where they are and give them what they need to be successful.
All right. Ramu, take us to the Q&A.
Sure. Let me see here. Okay. So we have a question here. Laura from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Welcome. So she writes, thank you for the content, really relevant. I am the co-founder of a D&I startup in Brazil. We support and encourage corporations to build more inclusive e-strategies through their own methodology that goes from diagnosis to awareness. We only have our own MVPs yet, so we're not operating in the market. I'd love to hear more about how startups can help support bigger companies on this journey.
Yeah, I think, I'm always looking out into the universe to see, how do we evolve our supports for talent. I think certainly there's been a number of innovations. Personally, I think there's some cool technologies that help with, making resume and job postings more inclusive in language, right? So tech can really help power this work. So I think it's just a matter of finding something that doesn't exist in the market, because I think, companies from everywhere are looking for solutions that will help them get to good data, good best-in-class sort of fundamental D&I work faster, so that then they can have more sophisticated conversations on topics that have to be led human to human and invest their time there.
And just to follow up on that question, since this person is doing a startup in the HR space, what do you ask potential vendors when you're selecting them to make sure that they're going to be fair and inclusive?
Yeah, I mean, I personally always, one of the first things is, in a pitch meeting, does their sales team look diverse, right? Do they sort of walk the walk? I think certainly, I've had experiences where I'm pitched to by a totally homogenous group and it's a D&I product, and I have been known to challenge that when it emerges. I think just also making sure that first and foremost, you're really thinking about the size of the company, right? Different sizes of companies have really different types of challenges. And I think the more you can contextualize and make relevant for the company that you're pitching to, the better chances you have overall.
All right, we have another question, this one from Condrial Clark. In addition to all the aforementioned actions that need to be taken by leadership, there is also a certain level of individual responsibility and internal debate that employees need to recognize and engage in regarding D&I in this metamorphic process to be truly successful on the company-wide level. So looking at the individual as well as the leadership, what are the roles? And then what advice can you give us leading D&I efforts at other companies with regard to engaging employees that may not be as keen or as brave to actively participate in the process?
Yeah. I would say this is an issue that comes up in every business, right? Because everybody is at a different place in their journey. And you can't expect that everybody's going to have sort of a uniform way at looking at any issue or going to have 100% alignment, right? These issues are human issues. Thus, they're nuanced, they're complex, and people feel differently about them. And I think the best thing you can do as sort of a D&I leader is to create forums for dialogue, healthy, productive dialogue, right? And I think, at the end of the day, I always work with our ERGs, for instance, and say, the business would like to help, but we need to be able to articulate what that looks like, what is most meaningful, and then talk about it, get in a group, hack the problem, There might be sort of dissent, and I think that's totally healthy. But I think when you create that forum for debate and then really try to keep the spirit of getting to something that will be productive and helpful for the community, that will serve you really well in being able to, pull the business in and connect underrepresented groups with the business and what they need.
How would you measure success in those type of efforts?
I would say it's really, for me, about hearing the community and making sure that whatever they ask for is thoughtful. It appreciates sort of the context of the business, right? I think that's important. It is moving the needle in a meaningful way, whether that be for our customers, for the employees themselves, for our partners. And it is something that is sustainable. A lot of what I look at is, how do we create process or systems or a body of work that we don't just get to hold on to for a short period of time and then it sort of dies on the vine, but how do we really nurture something that can be turned into a movement and a sustainable change within the business, one that just becomes part of the DNA or the tissue of our organization.
And as another follow-up to this issue of sort of employee engagement in this process, what are your thoughts about providing training to managers or their teams when it comes to D&I issues?
Yeah, I mean, education is everything, right? So I think the more that you can get into the organization, like I mentioned, language is where people get really stuck. And when they get stuck, what usually ends up happening is we walk away from the problem, right? And we stop dialoguing. And in any other space, right, that would just not be acceptable. We would say, well, okay, like the button on the computer is broken. Well, you take it to IT and you work the solution, you get through that. We have got to train managers and individual contributors in the business to be able to know how to unstick themselves and keep moving forward, even when it's hard. I think this is the idea of learning how to, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And for me, one of the biggest things that I practice myself is sometimes I'll have to remove myself and go and think about it and really just take a pause and then come back with more objective thinking. I think that is really something that we have to do. And I think, wherever you can add learning and development resources, giving people the tools to be able to have these types of conversations is so important. I can't even stress enough how vital that is to a good D&I strategy.
Maybe you could sort of articulate what are some of the key skills an inclusive leader needs. Like a couple that I've heard are being able to build psychological security, obviously empathy, but what tangible skills do people need? What are these essential skills? And then what types of training work?
Yeah, I would say in terms of inclusive leadership, the first and foremost thing is that everybody is sort of looking to you as a model. So I think, doing things like making sure in meetings, everybody has equal time to speak and share ideas. I think it actually means taking the action to solicit ideas if somebody isn't speaking up. That's so important, right? If you're the only in the room, right, you might be shy about sharing a particular topic. Or the topic that you might need to raise is, hey, like, this is not going to go well for my community, or I don't like this language in here, right? And those can be hard things to raise. So I think, creating vehicles for anonymous feedback, making sure everybody has, time to speak. I think really thinking through how you bond and celebrate with your team and what you recognize and reward. If somebody is cutting somebody off in a meeting, interrupting them, and they're like so extroverted, and you personally are an extrovert, so you resonate with that and you reward that, you might be missing opportunities from the introvert on the team who just isn't speaking up. And so I think it's really just doing that intrinsic analysis of like, what behaviors am I rewarding? I think it's also, like I said, bonding. This probably doesn't apply so much in quarantine or during COVID, but if you're going to a bar and a happy hour and that's your Friday ritual, you might be excluding people that have parenting obligations, caring for elder parents. They might not tolerate alcohol and they can't be in that setting. So you're cutting part of your team away from networking opportunities, that bonding time. So really thinking about, how do you create celebrating moments, bonding time with the team that are inclusive for everybody, and really not playing favorites for just folks that like the same things that you like, I think is really important.
We probably have a few students in the audience today. And so I'm curious to know, we asked your advice for companies. What kind of advice would you give to an undergraduate student or a professional student? I mean, how should they be thinking about these issues as they think about their careers and in whatever direction they're heading in?
Yeah, I mean, I would give sort of students the same advice that I give any business professional is, diversity and inclusion is absolutely the future of business, right? And it's how we're going to go to market. It's how we're going to take care of our employees. And so if you're headed into finance, if you're headed into tech, if you're headed into business development, you name it, it's a good time to think about how you can personally translate D&I work into your core job. So, we talked about inclusive marketing. So now our marketers, even though their job is marketing, they are marketing with a D&I lens. They are marketing with inclusion in mind. And I think if you can come in and sell yourself as somebody who understands that and who is thinking about doing regular sort of core work every day with this in mind, I think that will serve your business very, very well in the long term. I think that will be a valuable asset to any company. And if you can think about sort of how your own company values sort of translate into your work, that will really set you apart.
Continuing on this career path questioning, if somebody wants your job, what skills do they need? What path can they take to get that kind of job? And what are the jobs in the field?
Yeah, the jobs are many and growing, which is really exciting. It's becoming a very popular sort of body of work in any corporation across many, many industries. I think, the specific skills that have served me really well is having an understanding of a variety of community issues. So really getting educated on underrepresented groups and, really learning about sort of what the priorities are for those groups and also the challenges that they face. I think working in human resources is always great experience to segue into D&I work because you learn about sort of the structural operating procedures of any organization, right, from the inside out. And I think also really what served me so well is my work in PR and public affairs and really thinking about how do we tell good stories? How do we find hidden figures? How do we represent our brand? What is that connective tissue and how do we articulate it from our values into our roles? And so I think, writing, speaking, any kind of storytelling mechanism is really powerful because I think, of course we can talk about the business case and how this is driving the bottom line and the innovation that comes from diverse teams. But it's also the right thing to do. And I think when we focus on the right thing to do, so much of that becomes humanizing these issues, talking about individuals and articulating challenges in a very storytelling way. And so I think those are some areas that I think are really important. The other thing I would say is baseline sort of legal knowledge is and employment law knowledge, I think is really important in this space. There are so many legalese around data collection, privacy, really understanding, what laws are in place to protect certain communities. So a baseline understanding of the law where you're practicing is important as well.
And I'm imagining you're seeing more data science needs as well.
Definitely, yes. And I would say it depends, what type of business you're in. If you're in a large business, right, they might have many, many roles dedicated to individual areas. Inclusive marketing could be a whole role, inclusive product, design, data collection, right? So it can be specific. In my role, it's really all centralized. So I work with partners across the business to execute on all of these ideas. And I play a lot of a role as a consultant for the business.
And I would be remiss to say, this is Berkeley Global. What do you see? Your company is in fact global. How does D&I change depending on which country you're in?
Yeah, it changes very drastically, right? Every country is in a very different place with how they talk about these issues. What issues are most pressing in this current moment? I think, having local context in the way that you do work is so important because, my sort of philosophy is wherever anybody is on their journey, we want to move them 1 or 2 steps forward, right, from where they are. Not to say that we're trying to get everybody to the exact same place, but we want to move everybody forward and broaden awareness, broaden understanding. And I think, if you're working and trying to create solutions for different geographies, you also have to recognize that, in different places around the world, there are different laws that impact various communities in different ways. And so just really, again, doing that listening tour, thinking about like, what are the things that are most important to your employees and starting there is great.
So we have a few minutes left, so I'll just remind our audience, if you have any questions, this is your last chance. But in the meantime, one final question I have is just, you've talked a little bit about engagement with the community. Are there partnerships or organizations you work with in communities, either in the US or elsewhere, to help advance some of these issues?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I've partnered with many organizations over my career. At Salesforce, I worked very closely with the UN Women's Organization. I mean, there's so many, the NAACP, but there's also really great local organizations that are doing awesome work in the community. We work with No Kid Hungry at KAYAK and OpenTable on the OpenTable side primarily. And they're doing some amazing work that really has local impact. Certainly at Salesforce, they had a Circle the Schools program, so really investing in quality education and surrounding the schools with support and resource. So I think, every business is different, but I think having that community footprint and that relationship is critical. And also, our employees are ambassadors for our brand, and they all are plugged in with local community organizations. And I think, we have a campaign internally at KAYAK and OpenTable called Do Good. And so we go out into the community. It's going to be a little tricky this year with all the virtual experiences, but we volunteer for a week as an organization. And I think that impact is something that, any company can sort of take and translate as part of their culture. And it's another just amazing way to, get people to bond and to learn and to celebrate our community outside of the normal business context.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that dimension of social responsibility. Maybe you can explain a little bit more. How does that contribute to the diversity and inclusion efforts?
Yeah, I mean, when our employees go out into the community and volunteer, right, many of the organizations that they work with serve underrepresented populations. And I think it's also a really good reminder that, in any business, you want to have a connection with the community. You want to understand, what's happening in society. How might this impact, the customers or the partners that we serve? And I think it just really deepens those connection points and really gets us into the service of, thinking about, who is it that we actually serve, and what are we actually trying to accomplish, and really gets back to sort of the company purpose. For us, it's helping people experience the world through travel and dining. And so, what a great way to kind of think about the people that we serve as we think about that company purpose and that charter.
Well, I think we should give Anika first a round of applause, and second, give you a chance if there's something that we haven't touched on, or advice for corporate leaders that you haven't had an opportunity to bring in. We'll give you a chance to share your closing remarks here.
Well, I will just say, DNI is an incredible body of work. If you're interested in the profession, I'm happy to speak with anybody. You can reach out. We'll share my LinkedIn. I would also say, for anybody that's considering adding this into their business, do it. It is such a value add, I think, all around. And really, there's so much good data out there that tells you how this, impacts the bottom line, the culture, how we connect to each other, how we connect to our customers. It's just such an exciting time to be in this space, and really just it would encourage everybody to get involved in their company, in their business, in their communities. I think that's how we really make progress on these important topics.
Great, thank you. Nice words to close on. Really appreciated those insights. Want to thank our audience for attending today. Appreciate your participation and engagement. And of course, thank you, Anika, for your contributions. I really have learned a lot over the course of this last hour.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and really congratulations on the series. And I wish you all the best of luck with the next one.
Thank you. And that is a good reminder that you have kicked off this series, and we're hoping that this becomes a really important part for people who are interested in the field of DE&I. I just posted in the chat a list of the upcoming speakers, but once a month, we're going to bring in a different diversity and inclusion leader to share these perspectives and these really practical hands-on advice and processes to go forward and make these companies more equitable workplaces, but really, make people's lives better and happier. And I think that's what diversity and inclusion really does. To your point early in the conversation about letting people bring their whole self to work, making companies a more productive and happier place to be. So, thank you so much for your time and insights today. And I think we can hand it over to Berkeley Global to close us out then.
Hello. Well, thank you all again so much for joining today. We're thrilled that you could participate in today's event. We're looking forward to future events as we continue to build out this exciting series. Please keep us posted and in your thoughts and check back as we continue to add to this program. And once again, thank you to Anika, our distinguished speaker, also to Ramu and Jill today for helping moderate and bring such great questions to the event. And thank you again to our audience for taking time out of your day. We know you're all very busy and there's a lot going on in the world, and we're happy that you could be here. Stay safe, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, a terrific weekend, and thank you.